It's the week ending Saturday, the 6th of July, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Hong Kong making arrests amid further protests and the storming of Parliament, Ursula von der Leyen nominated as the next head of the EU Commission, and 15-year-old Coco Gauff knocking out Venus Williams in the first week of Wimbledon. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are Gillie, Holden Frith, and making his debut on the show, Gabriel Power.
Hello.
Gabriel Power. Olly Mann. We're like a gang of superheroes. You are going to be filling Jamie Timpson's shoes. This is intimidating stuff.
I am indeed, yes.
You're also kicking us off this week, so no pressure. What do you think Gabriel Power this week should be remembered for?
The international community has discovered that Japan's relationship with whaling may be fishier than it realised.
It was all hands on deck before setting sail on a hunt that's been 3 decades coming. These are the men that will bring fresh local whales back to Japan. Harpoons are ready, and so are the crew.
Bigger and fatter whales means better meat. We'll transport it as fresh as possible so that old people can taste it and remember the old days.
That was a Deutsche Welle report this week by Matthew Moore, in which he spoke to a crew of a Japanese whaling ship. So, Gabriel, after 30 years, Japan have decided to resume the hunting of whales.
So they announced late last year that they would be leaving the International Whaling Commission, the IWC, which they'd been a part of officially since 1951. They'd been part of the agreement to halt whaling, put a moratorium on whaling since 1986. They've been under the impression since then that the moratorium was a temporary ban, and this week whaling has begun.
Why? Why was there pressure for this ban to be lifted?
They were under the impression, as were Norway and Iceland, two fellow whaling countries, that the moratorium would be temporary, just to boost stocks back up. But by the time it got to about 1988, these countries realized that the moratorium was more of a permanent ban. And so they pushed for exemptions in the IWC agreement that meant they were allowed to scientifically hunt whales, which, I mean, depending on who you ask, this makes either a lot of sense or no sense. The exemption has forced them to go whaling in Antarctica. So that's the only place they're allowed to do it. And so they've continued to do whaling on an industrial scale there, apparently for research purposes. But it's come to the attention of experts, particularly whaling experts and marine biologists, that a lot of the information that Japan has been researching through killing whales could be determined through non-lethal biopsies and feces studies and things like that.
But it's not really about scientific research, is it, as Gabriel is implying, Rebecca? It's because, as we heard in the clip there, people are nostalgic in Japan about the taste of whale meat.
It's hard to imagine, I think, coming from a non-whale meat eating context. But yes, there is a powerful... I was just thinking it's a bit like the role of Spam, really. Whales have been hunted...
It's a dissertation I'd love to read. Gillie on the role of Spam.
Gillie on the role of Spam. Because whales have been hunted in Japan for hundreds of years and have formed, part of the diet. But it really became a major part of the diet in the years after World War II, when food supplies were relatively scarce. And it became almost industrialized in that, it was served in school canteens. Whale consumption, however, peaked in the 60s, and since then has been steadily declining. Obviously, a large part due to the fact, to the limitations on whale hunting, but also, the tastes have changed and moved away from it. So there has been some interesting commentary to the effect that there really isn't much of a demand for this reversal of the whaling ban, and that it's more of a statement by Shinzo Abe's relatively nationalistic government saying to the rest of the world, Japan is going to do what it wants, we're going to respect our cultural traditions, and we won't be dictated to.
I mean, that link to wartime is absolutely fascinating, isn't it, Holden? Because I know, obviously, that in Japan they teach the Second World War in a rather different way to what we learn here, but nonetheless it's not their most glorious chapter in every way, clearly. And something that's nostalgic, seems silly, but a taste that's nostalgic of that era, maybe that does play into, even remilitarization's been discussed recently, hasn't it?
I think there's a couple of strands there, and one is definitely, there is an ancient tradition of whaling in Japan, and so there's part of that sense, almost like fox hunting here, which is back in the news again this week too. But I think there's maybe the fact that it consumption climbed so rapidly after the Second World War meant that it was actually it was a sort of protein of last resort. It was the only thing people could get their hands on. Yeah. And so maybe that actually explains why it declined so sharply once other agriculture had recovered, trade had recovered. There was just so much other choice. If you look at the decline, it had started long before the ban came into place, and the ban has kept it at relatively low levels. But it does seem that it's definitely a very small sector of the population that is really in favour of resuming hunting on a commercial level. And in fact, the industry needs government support in order to make it worthwhile. If it was purely market-based, there just wouldn't be enough demand to keep it going.
But Gabriel, am I right in saying this isn't being done on a commercial level? It's capped, isn't it?
Yes, it is capped at 227 whales a year at the moment. But the demand for whales has dropped dramatically since the 1960s. I mean, it makes up less than 0.01% of their meat intake in a year. They eat about 3,000 tons of it a year compared to 10,000 tons of horse. And only 4% of the population would say that they eat it regularly enough to sustain it. And the government subsidies are currently keeping it afloat. And there are theories that Shinzo Abe is not just placating nationalist kind of sentiments, but also that he might even be doing that while letting the market kind of influence the industry enough so that it dies like kind of elegantly on its own.
And that comparison with fox hunting, I mean, foxes are a pest in the countryside, aren't they? This is the argument of the Countryside Alliance. They need to be culled back anyway. And so Greenpeace would say, by contrast, whales, they're endangered. But actually, the particular whales that they're hunting in Japan, minke whales, they're not endangered, are they? And they never have been.
No, they're not endangered. The thing is that this story has really made me think, do you remember how saving the whales used to be like a huge thing?
Yes.
That was like a byword for the whole of environmentalism.
Yeah. It
was like, tree hugging and whale saving were literally the only things that you're supposed to care about, if you were an environmentalist. And we really have moved away from framing the debate in those kind of terms. Like climate change has just taken over so much of our discussion of this kind of thing. And it is true that there isn't necessarily a reason from a conservation perspective for whales not to be hunted in sustainable numbers. I think that the interesting thing about this is that, as we've been discussing, there isn't really a particular reason to do it beyond just saying, well, we want to.
No, but there is some demand in Japan for it, clearly, as we heard in the clip.
But then the whale meat that they are currently receiving from these, so-called scientific researchers are more than enough to cater to that demand. Although I did read something...
Yes. But you're elegantly dodging my point, which isn't it a bit hypocritical of the West and people that don't eat horse and whales to say, you shouldn't because we feel icky about it and we think they're beautiful, when this particular species isn't endangered, given the amount of cod and chips that we eat, for example?
I think it is hard to justify the outrage about it when the average whale that's hunted probably has a much better life than the average cow or chicken that's raised for meat. And it does seem more honest for Japan to say we're going out to hunt these animals for meat rather than for scientific purposes, and it just happens we're choosing the most delicious species to concentrate our research on.
Yeah, there you go. Honesty, Rebecca, that's the reason. They were eating it anyway, so why not be honest?
Yeah.
All right, you should. I don't want to eat a whale.
No, I know, but you see what I'm saying? It's a bit hypocritical.
You know who has eaten whale, though?
She's doing it again. She's dodging the question again. She won't acknowledge that it might be a bit hypocritical.
Well, Holden's already covered that.
Fine, okay. Well, so on. Who has eaten whale then?
Gabriel Power.
This is a terrible debut to make. Admitting I've eaten whale.
Where did you eat whale?
I've eaten it twice, actually. Sorry.
A repeat offender.
Yeah. So once was when I was very young and foolish with a friend in Iceland.
You didn't inhale?
Hey. No, it was I had like a steak in some restaurant. I was kind of sampling random Icelandic delicacy, like hakal, the rotten shark, and all that stuff.
Right, yeah,
so I thought I'd have it as part of a nutritious Icelandic meal.
Okay.
And then the second time I was in Japan and I couldn't read a menu, and I accidentally ordered whale fat or whale bacon sashimi, and it was one of the most disgusting things I've ever eaten.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was not worth the death of a giant marine mammal.
But then, I mean, that goes for most kind of culinary Delicacies, yeah, doesn't it? I mean, if they're a delicacy, they're niche. If they're niche, there's probably a reason.
I have a strange delicacy that connects Spam and Japan and
knew
the Second
you would.
World War.
And the Romans?
Yeah. No, I don't think
Oh.
I can bring the Romans in.
Shame.
Hawaiians, though. It's Hawaii is the per capita the biggest consumer of Spam in the world, which is partly because of the Japanese population in Hawaii and the difficulty of getting fresh supplies to the island during the Second World War. And after that, the taste for it had developed to such an extent that you can now get essentially Spam-based sushi in every 7-Eleven corner shop in Hawaii.
I would eat that.
It's
That
not
sounds
bad.
Definitely.
delicious.
It's more filling than most sushi.
Maybe they could replace the whale items on the menu with spam-based items and resolve this whole situation.
That sounds like an excellent way forward. And maybe if Japanese people haven't been consuming much whale meat, they may not even know the difference.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the show, Gabriel.
Thank you very much.
Promising debut. Rebecca, you're up next after this. Rebecca, it's your turn to shine. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
To have one family member flee you is a tragedy. To have two starts to look suspicious.
Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum cultivates an image of Dubai as a modern city, an outward-looking, business-friendly destination, a place of leisure and of luxury. Princess Latifa's regular skydives, wrapped in her country's flag, made her seem the perfect ambassador. But a friend told us, in reality, she was a prisoner in a gilded cage.
The BBC's Gabriel Gatehouse reporting for Newsnight last year. Rebecca, what was the story this week?
So the story this week is that Princess Haya, who is the junior wife of Sheikh Mohammed, the ruler of Dubai and the Prime Minister of the UAE, she has arrived in London. She's left him, allegedly, via Germany first, and now don't worry, she's safe. She's staying at an £85 million property in central London. And
It's the equivalent of a refuge.
Indeed. And so she hasn't spoken publicly, but the implication is that the pair of them have split. She has fled the country. He responded, now he's 69 years old, I think, and he responded by posting a poem on his Instagram that didn't directly call her out, but was obviously directed at his estranged wife.
It was around the theme of betrayal.
Very unusual behaviour for a man of his years.
Had he written the poem, by the way?
I don't know
the
if he was
source?
the author of the poem.
I believe he was. He regularly writes poems and posts them on his Instagram account, Sultan41. And if I had any of the Instagram accounts, Sultan1 to 40, I might be tempted to join his wife in hiding.
Well, on the other hand, he's a very wealthy man. If ever you're going to find a buyer,
Well, yeah.
surely Sheikh Mohammed's got to have the money. Okay, so this has been covered by other outlets, though. Why are you bringing it to the table? What have we missed?
Well, there's some interesting geopolitical implications arising from this. It looks like Princess Haya is going to settle in London and pursue the divorce case from there. They have two young children who are with her. And so where this gets interesting is, firstly, it looks like this case is going to be conducted in British courts, which is a bit sticky for Britain's relationship with Dubai, because it sounds like it's not the most amicable of splits, and that he is probably going to contest for the children to be returned. There was speculation that she initially went to Germany because she didn't trust the UK authorities to have her back, which isn't entirely without merit, because Sheikh Mohammed's daughter, Sheikha Sharma, he's got about 23 children, I think. She actually fled her father's mansion in Surrey and escaped the bodyguards posted around the property in 2002, making a bid for freedom. She was picked up off the street in Cambridge by Dubai security personnel and flown back to Dubai, and she hasn't been seen in public since.
So when you say this could get icky for the relationship between the UK and the UAE, what you mean is that the openness of our judicial system might mean certain facts coming to light, or alleged facts, that never would if this case was run in the UAE.
Yeah, I mean,
about Dubai and the way it's run.
In the UAE, there wouldn't be a case at all, which is what makes the whole thing a bit dodgy. But there's also a risk to the relationship between the UAE and Jordan, because Princess Haya is the half-sister of the current ruler of Jordan, Abdullah II. She's a daughter of the late king. And there are 200,000 Jordanians who live and work in Dubai, and their remittances that they are sending back to Jordan make up a large part of Jordan's economy. Dubai also gives money to Jordan, and so this could potentially put a strain on relationships between two countries. Obviously, Jordan doesn't want to be seen as allowing any kind of disrespect or ill treatment of a member of its royal family, but at the same time, they certainly don't want to upset Dubai's rulers.
Is this being a bit overstated, though, Gabriel? Because at the end of the day, he is one of the richest men in the world. If he doesn't want facts to become public, he certainly is capable of managing a very hefty payout without really it affecting his personal wealth. So isn't that what's going to happen, really?
I mean, to an extent, that could be what's already happening with the introduction of Mary Robinson to the issue, who was the former president of Ireland and UN Human Rights Commissioner. She was in Dubai to sort out the previous disappearance of Sheikha Latifah.
Oh, who's Sheikha Latifah, and what do you mean sort out?
She is the sister of Sheikha Samsa, and she actually mounted a runaway attempt of her own on a boat with a Frenchman. It seemed that she was heading towards India, and she was then intercepted off the coast of Goa by some combination of the UAE and Indian Navy. There seems to be some confusion about exactly what happened, but the end result is that she was returned to Dubai, at which point the UAE government seemed to go into overdrive to mount some sort of publicity campaign, which is where Mary Robinson was involved. She and Latifah and Princess Haya appeared together, essentially trying to say, look, this is a very troubled girl, she needs her privacy, everything's fine, she's safe back here in Dubai.
Which is interesting because you hear a moderate amount, don't you, if you're interested in that part of the world, from the organisation Detained in Dubai, who campaign about the conditions that people are kept in if they're accused of smuggling drugs into the country or whatever, if they're a tourist, for example. And the insinuation, it always seems to me, is, well, if you've got the money in Dubai, you're fine. It's the people without the money who aren't. And therefore, the suggestion of that is that the royal family would be having quite a cushy life. But Detained in Dubai have waded in on this as well, to sort of imply that people in the royal family, people in, I don't know if harem is the correct term these days, but in his extended family of 6 wives, they themselves may be kind of imprisoned. Yeah,
no, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it, really. Before Latifah launched her escape bid, which was last year, she posted, it's like a 40-minute video to YouTube where she went into how miserable and restrained her life was. She wasn't allowed to go to any private place, not to a friend's apartment or anything like that. Everywhere she went, even if she went to take a bath, she was accompanied by a maid. Absolutely no freedom, no privacy. And she basically said in the video that she was recording it because she feared for her life and she wanted her side of the story to be out there. And I think if you watched it, obviously you can't speak as to other people's medical or mental states, but she certainly seems very lucid in those videos. And lots of commentators observed that in the photos with Princess Haya and Mary Robinson, she looked pretty out of it. She looked dazed, and she, in her video, had accused her father of forcing her sister to take all these drugs that were making her very confused after she was returned from her escape attempt. And so I think this is something that's got to play in here. And these are the kind of things that I think Princess Haya is going to face some pressure to speak out and say, why was she speaking up, defending the actions of the royal family and making out that everything was fine? Was she trying to cover something up? What does she know about what goes on in the family?
And according to the BBC, which is quoting what they say are sources close to Princess Haya, the reason that she decided to flee was that she discovered disturbing information about that first attempted runaway and what brought Latifah back to Dubai.
And what about the British establishment's relationship with Sheikh Mohammed as an individual? Because if all that dirty laundry is aired in public, will he end up having the British tabloids chasing after him? And I mean, at the moment, he's kind of left alone in this country, isn't he? He's one of the big racehorse owners. I've seen him walking around Royal Ascot. He's probably got some bodyguards, but basically he's ignored. Yeah,
there's really deep links between Britain and the UAE, both on the political level with cooperation on anti-terrorism policies and trade. But then, as you say, it's very personal too. Princess Haya came to school here. She went to University of Oxford. The Sheikh himself is often seen talking to the Queen at various race courses. He runs one of the world's biggest horse racing operations from Cambridge, and he has several properties. It feels as
this is basically where he comes on holiday, isn't it? I suppose is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and he is also very publicity shy, and I think this could at least put him off being such a public figure within the UK. It could also put members of our royal family off being photographed with him.
Gabriel.
One last thing is that the saga threatens to further sour relations between Jordan and the UAE, which were already bad because of Jordan's decision not to side with Saudi Arabia and the UAE over its boycott of Qatar. And Qatar appears to be stepping in and supplying the money and, offering enough employment to Jordan to make up for a possible shortfall that may come from this saga in employment and money from the UAE.
Okay, one last story to come after this. Hello, I'm Olly Mann, interrupting my own voice to bring you this important breaking news. There is a magazine version of this podcast. It's imaginatively called The Week, and it's a digest of the best news, reviews and columns from more than 200 sources every week. Packed with multiple perspectives on the most important topics, it will burst your filter bubble and lead you out of the echo chamber. If that sounds like your sort of publication, pick up your copy today or go to theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the promo code podcast to receive your first 6 issues free, as well as a free Moleskine notebook. And so, finally this week, it's Holden's turn. Holden, what do you think this week will be remembered for?
For TV fans, it's time for another plot twist.
To me, a lot of what happened since the turn of the century in terms of the changes in TV has to do with things like DVRs. Suddenly, TV, which had originally been something that would just sort of extrude into your living room like cookie dough and then disappear. It was a disposable, superficially live thing, even though it was taped. It was a text that you could save, rewind, and share with people. You could pause it. People don't even remember this, but it was a radical change. It basically meant that you could make shows that had a certain kind of visual beauty or density, needed to be decoded, needed to be revisited. You couldn't do that before. Before that, when you created TV, it had to be extremely simple. People had to know what they were looking at immediately. It couldn't bore or confuse you. It couldn't upset you enough to turn it off. Like it actually had to have certain simple qualities. Once the technology changed, it could expand in its ambition in really remarkable ways. Shows could get slower, faster. Cable changed things, and then the internet. There would not be modern television in the way there is without the internet.
That was Emily Nussbaum speaking on the New Yorker podcast. Emily Nussbaum likes to watch pod. Holden, what's the story here?
It's a small thing, but it's part of a much bigger trend, and it really will have an impact for all of our lives. The small thing is that NBC has decided to deprive Netflix of its most popular series, the American version of The Office, which accounts for 7% of all video streamed by Netflix users.
What? That one show?
That one show.
That one decade-old sitcom?
It did go on for
7%?
Quite a long time, so there's many episodes. But yeah, it's by far the biggest series for worldwide users of Netflix.
Wow.
The reason NBC is taking this decision is that it is going to launch its own streaming service. And so as existing rights agreements lapse, it's starting to reclaim that entire archive. The reason this is part of a bigger trend is that lots of other big TV producers are doing exactly the same thing. So here we have the BBC and ITV poised to launch BritBox, which will be a subscription streaming service for their archive programs. That means those will no longer be available on Netflix or Amazon. But also in the US, Disney, Warner, Apple are all launching their own paid subscription TV services too.
Okay, but we're not a consumer tech show. I mean, so what? What's the significance of this?
What this means is, first of all, that the programs that everybody's got used to being able to watch on Netflix, Amazon Prime, perhaps even on Sky, which scoops up a lot of other producers' TV programs, are now going to end up in this very fragmented market where you're going to have to pay a lot of separate subscriptions if you want to keep up with these series.
And then the question, I suppose, is, Gabriel, what happens next?
I assume, I'm just guessing, but I assume that maybe people will get bored of paying too much, and that the fragmentation of the market will lead to like a really drastic increase in prices. So looking, you'd be paying £8 a month. You're paying £8 a month at the moment for Netflix. What would that go up to? £50 a month? That would be £600 a year.
Because people are subscribing to multiple services. But then, Rebecca, people in the days of satellite and cable, when that was the only option if you wanted a premium TV subscription, would be spending £50 to £100 a month to get the sport and the movies and everything. So it's just the same, isn't it?
It is the same, and this is exactly, it's going to be really weird to watch as these services break down into smaller and smaller fragments, and then someone comes along and says, hey, what about I offer you a bundle of all these different channels and their output? Oh no, you've accidentally essentially just bought a Sky subscription again.
Yeah.
This does seem to be the way it's going. And it's going to be, I think what's interesting, Netflix aren't particularly, they don't really discuss what they're doing, behind the scenes publicly very much. But I imagine that this is going to be kind of a watershed moment for them, because in the next few years, they're going to be discovering whether their Netflix original content is strong enough to sustain the service. They've been pumping out an enormous amount. I think it was 1,500 hours of Netflix original last year. And so the test is going to be, are people watching Netflix now for Netflix content? And I think the answer is probably still no.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it, Holden? Because all the marketing around Netflix, from House of Cards through to The Crown and everything else, is about this shiny, original, expensive content. And yet the truth is people like the old stuff. If BBC Two was a premium streaming service, it wouldn't be people paying for Newsnight. It would be for Dad's Army.
Yeah, I think those big flagship TV programs may get new people in through the door and certainly generate buzz around them. But then I think certainly what keeps people subscribing is the fact that they can just dip in and watch an old episode of Friends or The Office or whatever. It has that kind of safe, reliable, comforting feeling to it. And for Netflix, being able to keep people subscribing for longer periods and reducing that churn is really important to their bottom line. They are still not making money. I think part of the reason this could be the start of a big shift is the foundations of what we've come to think of really as the golden age of TV are much more fragile than they might sound. Netflix lost $380 million in the first 3 months of this year, and the chief executive said earlier this week they are going to start looking at program budgets for their own content much more carefully and exert more cost control there. So I think some of that creative freedom that we've got used to over the last few years might start to come under threat.
And oddly, Rebecca, the victor in all of this in the UK, it seems to me, could actually be the old-fashioned public service broadcasters. Because if people only have a limited amount of budget to get their Apple subscription and their Now TV subscription or whatever, they can only afford 2 or 3. The other one they're never going to stop watching is the one they have to pay for, which is the BBC, because of the licence fee. So, in a way, even though the budgets can't compete for the original programming, iPlayer's got quite a good future, hasn't it, as the free one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is the reason that, on both sides of the Atlantic, the main TV channels are wanting to take their content back, is that they realise that is where the money is and where the loyalty is. As Holden was saying, that's what keeps people coming back, is stuff from the archives. And if you've got access to a great archive of stuff that people remember fondly, that gives people good feelings, that they want to revisit time and time again, that in the long term is a stronger prospect, which is kind of bad for Netflix because, as Holden was saying, they've lost so much money. They're so predicated on this Uber-type model of spend until you've got complete dominance, and then you're going to rake in massive amounts of money. It kind of seems like Netflix is now at a point where they might actually be heading on a kind of a downward trajectory.
And what about piracy, Gabriel? Because one of the things Netflix did is make it more convenient to stream stuff through their service than to try and find it illegally. But if you're avoiding a large cost, that could again see an upsurge in people just finding ever more convenient ways to find it without paying anything at all.
Since the age of the internet began, it seems like consumers have gotten used to getting things for free, particularly films and TV shows and things like that. In markets where people are being priced out, streaming things illegally or downloading or torrenting things illegally is a kind of natural result of that. If you look at football, you have astronomically expensive Sky subscriptions, and then BT comes along and says you have to pay us too. And so what do people do? They go and set up streaming websites, or they go and use streaming websites. And especially when you introduce ads to the equation, it itself is becoming incredibly lucrative for pirators.
This is the thing I think that TV channels and streaming services have to keep in mind, is that it's so much harder now to force people to pay for things. I think, it's going to be very difficult for them to say, oh, if you want to watch The Office, you have to get a subscription with this different service. Because honestly, the way I look at it, now I don't think I can still be done for this. I don't know if there's some kind of statute of limitations. But, I used to stream, when I was a teenager, I'd stream everything and download music, download TV shows and stuff. And it's like, I could go back to doing that tomorrow if somehow all my favourite shows went off of the streaming services. It's like the £8 a month is a convenience fee I pay not to have to pirate things. And if they turn that into a £20 a month, or 3 different £8 a month services, then a lot of people are going to be like, is that really worth it?
Except that evidence is anecdotal, isn't it, Holden? We're all talking as if it's an absolute foregone conclusion that this will be a failure, this fragmentation of different streaming devices. But all the evidence we actually have suggests that there are millions of people out there prepared to pay. And actually, in this environment, news, here we are giving away our content on a podcast. Actually, you guys are looking for people to pay for content online, if possible. That's the solution people want, and they've done it with video streaming. It's working.
Yeah, and there is a movement towards more subscription in online news services as well. And I think I'm conflicted about this argument because, as the clip at the beginning was saying, the rise of subscription services has undeniably led to a dramatic increase in the quality of TV. I think free-to-air digital news has probably led to a dramatic reduction in the quality of news available around the world. So there's definitely a role for the kind of specialization of audience and production that having that committed band of people who are paying for a product generates. But I think there's also the point at which it becomes so diffuse that you're not going to be able to maintain enough of a sizable audience to keep that going. What I would imagine is if we do go through this period now of fragmentation, we'll probably then end up with 1 or 2 of those services winning out, and they'll then buy up all of the others, and we'll be kind of back to where we are. But it might just be that we have to go through a period of much more risk-averse TV production for the next few years.
Okay, finally, I'm just going to put you on the spot. What was the last streaming box set that you got completely hooked on, Rebecca?
Oh, thank God you asked me. I've wanted to talk about it for the whole segment. Call My Agent on Netflix, a French TV series called 10%, and it's about a Parisian acting agency and the ups and downs. And you've got French actors playing themselves. It's really twisty and turny, great characters.
Okay, Holden?
The Americans on Amazon Prime, 2 deep cover Russian agents who are based in DC and end up living next to an FBI agent.
And Gabriel?
My girlfriend had never watched Peep Show, so we went back to the very beginning and watched all 9 series in about a week. Amazing.
If I was to choose one, weirdly, it would be ITV's Marcella. Have you ever seen that?
No, I remember it was on a couple.
Yeah, detective show. Anna Friel spent a lot of time just watching the lips. That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Holden Frith, Rebecca Gillie and Gabriel Power. Don't forget you can subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also in print form as an actual magazine. You can get that wherever you get your magazines. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to Unwrap next week, bye-bye.